Yeah, we're going to go into executive session at the end of the meeting, so we don't hold any of you up. So I'm going to open the floor to public participation. Just FYI, we'd like to hear from all of you, if possible, or if possible. But just keep your comments to about 2 or 3 minutes if you have anything to say. But is there anybody who would like to say anything? Yes. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm James Yobro. I'm a parent of a kindergartner and a second grader at Woodstock. And as we're doing the minutes from the last meeting, and something that Elaine Lively said kind of struck me about equity and how do we define that. My daughter in kindergarten had her classroom basically cut in half. So they have 21 kids in one small space. And right next door are 6 students from the Prosper Valley School that are also in kindergarten. I just asked if we could possibly think about merging those 2 classes sooner than later rather than wait until next fall. Why not do it now? They're only halfway through their kindergarten year, which is crucial to their future, and it might make equitable sense for them to be merged at this point. Second point, quickly, at the last meeting, Paige invited folks to email about the Campus Configuration Committee. And I sent an email on the 25th of November and the 3rd of December, and I haven't heard back yet.
I have the list today.
You have the list, terrific. Okay, so we'll hear back about that. And then the third point is the 21st Century School Committee. I've heard sort of different pieces about that, and I just don't know if the plan is to share the information and the learnings from that committee, which I understand has done a tremendous amount of work over the last 18 months. Will that be shared with the public and with the Campus Configuration Committee? So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Claire? Oh, sorry. Claire?
My name is Claire Debico. I'm a parent of 3 children in the district, and I have a little bit that I want to say. I'm going to try to talk fast and be as concise as I can, but I have just a little bit. So I'm impressed by the passion, enthusiasm, grit, intelligence, creativity, and motivation of our students and faculty. Over the past months, many people in our community and schools have stepped forward to participate in fact-finding, facility and strategic planning and visioning processes to lay the groundwork for our long-term sustainability. However, I left the last board meeting feeling that some of those efforts were not adequately acknowledged. For example, to date, there's been, sort of echoing Jamie here, but little mention or discussion of the 21st Century School Committee's findings, the result of over 18 months of work with a team of expert architects, engineers, educational experience designers, dozens of faculty, staff, board members, and students to assess the middle and high school facilities, visit case study schools, develop a vision for the middle and high school facilities, and ultimately to recommend a way forward for addressing the challenges of that facility. Addressing the middle and high school facility is the largest project we faced, and that committee's work should complement and inform the configuration committee's decisions. I also felt there was a lack of acknowledgement of alternative funding strategies for facility projects that come up. Transformational change for our district will require both public and private funding, and this needs to be planned for and spoken about as a part of the decision-making process. I've only heard people talk about bonds at these meetings. And finally, there was no mention of creating a bold vision that leverages our community assets and encompasses both our educational outcomes and our facilities. Really quickly, the reality of Vermont's approach to educational funding puts our district at a huge disadvantage financially because of Act 60, which forces us to send half of our tax revenue to the state to be distributed elsewhere. The state is going to keep putting pressure on us to reduce costs. We can't, as a district, cut costs as a solution because that will eventually reduce the quality of our children's educational experience and erode enrollment and continue to serve as a barrier to attracting new families and increasing revenue, and also attracting tuition students. While near-term cost cutting may be required and obviously is required to buy time to implement a long-term vision, we need to do this with a mindset of eventual growth and expansion. There are only 3 options available to deal with our state funding challenges. To challenge Act 60, that's not going to happen. To create a town academy model that allows our district more independence, that's going to take Herculean efforts. I'm not sure we have that bandwidth. Or focus on enrollment growth. because growth generates revenue by attracting tuition students. Option 3 is the most viable while still working within our state funding system. And implementing option 3 requires considerable investment in facilities and in student success. Our district is positioned in an amazing area with a lot of desirable assets. We could create a turnaround strategy that focuses on revenue opportunities and growth rather than cost cutting and decline. We need a bold vision that will attract tuition students and new families to our district. To grow and generate new revenue, we have to reinvest. For example, let's talk about the middle and high school, and I'm almost done. Every aspect of that building is obsolete, it's energy inefficient, it's not up to current building code, and it does not support our current learning and teaching objectives. Something has to be done. It's not an option to do nothing. This is an opportunity to develop a facility solution that will be transformative for our district by increasing enrollment and revenue, and to make our district fiscally sound in the long term. A transformative solution like that would need public and private funding partnerships. Bond funding alone won't do it. A large Band-Aid solution would be a really tough sell. You'd raise taxes, but you wouldn't solve the challenges. What's not a tough sell is a growth mindset, unique leading programs within our school, and a unified mission that focuses on leveraging the assets of our communities. That's something that could be sold to taxpayers and private funders. I'm concerned that fear is paralyzing our district. The data about declining enrollment, reduced revenues, aging facilities, needs cuts, winners and looters overshadows the entrepreneurial spirit of Vermonters. As a whole district, we are greater than the sum of our parts. If we have a bold educational plan, amazing facilities, and a unifying possibility mindset, we will attract new families, increase enrollment in all of our district schools, including our elementary schools. We'll increase matriculation of tuition students, and we'll have the opportunity to reinvest in our amazing students and faculty. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Sandy Rivera, first-time caller, long-time listener. I just had a couple observations about the budget. I noticed a post-secondary counselor, which I think is outstanding, handles some of the diversity in paths, but cutting a woodworking opportunity, that's someone going to Hartford. I also noticed the line item for the math coach. I have my own opinion. STEM is core, but the definition was not clear, and that equaled 4 budget items that offered direct benefit to our students. We can't dilute what scores do, and they matter. And the more coaching we give our students on these scores that influence their post-secondary experience, the better equipped they are. I wouldn't be able to put $90K into a budget without it being very well defined. I'm challenged monthly on my expenditures at work. I encourage the board to do the same. Just make sure it's well defined. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you very much for your comments. We greatly appreciate them. Chairperson's report. Well, we've heard from the Finance Committee today. Policy will be reporting to us within our agenda. Negotiations, we still have not reached an agreement. We are hoping to meet with Carrie and Gordon within the next 2 weeks to go over some of their thoughts and our thoughts and see if we can get some more clarification around some of the questions that are still at the table. As for the committees, thank you for following up on that. We have kind of re-established, Mary Beth and I kind of reevaluated where we were with our committees over the last year and a half since we formed our new district board, and found that some were working, some were not working, and we needed to make some changes based on how we were moving forward. So obviously, we are going to keep the finance committee. Jennifer, Matt, Jim Half, and Richard will continue to work on the finance committee. For policy, Jim Half, Pamela, Lou Piccone, and Sherry will be working on policy. Jim and Pamela will be working together as co-chairs to kind of drive the policies and how we're moving forward with that. The negotiations committee will continue to be Milena, myself, Patty, and Richard. I'm trying to convince Milena and Patty to be co-chairs, but they're not taking that bribe or anything. We've switched communications to really community engagement because we found that we really need to get more feedback from our community members, our parents, our teachers, as well as our students. We think we haven't really heard our students' voices enough sometimes in some of these big questions that are being talked about, as well as more consistently talking to our parents and community members as well on a regular basis and getting more instant feedback. I've really liked the process in which this new
Thought exchange?
Thank you. Thought exchange works, where you can really see how people are processing their thoughts through questions instantly. I think it's really good for all of us to see. And I think it's really important as we start redefining who we are, and that there's so many ships moving, trains going down different tracks, whatever you want to say, that we just need more information and feedback from people. I think it's really, really important. So on the community engagement, I'm going to have Justin and Jess co-chair together. Adam, Ray Rice, Sam DiNatelli, and Mary Beth will be sitting there because she's the only one who has access to this thoughts program.
You should name and password.
for the time being. And I know that Sam wanted to switch to communications, so we've moved her over there. For campus configurations and buildings, Bob Coates and Bryce will be co-chairs. Tim Bishop and Patty will also sit on the board, on the subcommittee, I should say. Garen and Maggie Mills from Woodstock, Rob Hansen from Pomfret, James, how do you pronounce your last name? Ziobro. Ben Jervy and Jason Drabecco will move over to this because this 21st century committee is going to morph into this campus configuration and buildings committee as a suggestion by Bob Coates, who had chaired the 21st century committee. He felt that we really needed to bring that information from 21st century into this whole conversation now, and that was really important.
And buildings and grounds.
And buildings and grounds, correct. One of the big challenges was, to be quite honest, is I didn't hear from any parents to volunteer for this committee with the exception of Woodstock. And I was very surprised by that. And that's why we kept it to the three parents that we have. I look at Jason as not only a parent, but somebody who really spearheaded with Bob the 21st Century Committee and has a real grasp on how to raise money without just a bond. He has a plethora of resources and information and knowledge to those capabilities, and I think we're going to really need him to help us understand the diversity of how we can achieve some of the things I think we're going to be talking about in the future. I still have a vacant seat at Bridgewater, and Keith, who is our representative from Plymouth, he hasn't been here for many meetings, so I didn't want to assign him to anything until he is here. I think that's important. And we also have another vacant seat at Plymouth. So that's where this is. I will be emailing this to everybody, including the parents who sent in things, but I wanted to make the announcement today because really, we kind of picked out of a hat the parents because we didn't want to I didn't want to show I didn't know how to pick y'all, so it was better to put you that way, so it was more fair than just kind of looking at it that way.
Chris, we've assigned Ray on a committee. We haven't put you or AJ on the committee. Do you want to be on the committee?
No, we're fine. We think Ray can carry a lot of water.
Okay. And that's where I am with everything. I mean, the Finance Committee has obviously been working hard with Mary Beth and Richard on getting a presentation to you. Policy's now working on transportation, and we'll be going into proficiency grading.
We're going into grading.
Grading. And the 21st Century Committee will start morphing in, but I do think that maybe in the future meeting, we can at least show to date where we are with it.
One of the things I would offer, and certainly is something that I'm aware of that we need to get back into those foundational systems, is having regular communications from the district office, giving everything that's happening. So actually, today we're finalizing a newsletter that's going to go out under a different format. It comes from a company called S'more. It's just a newsletter format. But in there's a link to the master planning from the work that was done by the 21st Century Committee. It was presented to the board last spring, but there's a direct link right to that report, so you'll be able to access that. And there's also a direct link to the update on the Prosper Valley School, the latest information that we have there. So that should be going out tomorrow, and that should, as long as you have an email connected with your students, you'll get that sent to you. So be on the lookout for that. So that's something that that's a goal of mine, is to be sure that we're pushing more out. Things are happening pretty quickly, a lot of complex issues, and we're really working to ensure that the communities have the most up-to-date information around it.
So at this point, the chairs of the various committees will set up the first committee meetings?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, they will be responsible. And from what I understand, Sam is a whiz at social media, so she's going to bring that expertise to the community outreach.
So while we're on the committees, each one of the committees, like the policy committee now has set up a specific date of the week and date, and we all need really to give Raina when our committees are going to meet, so it can get out and be warned, so the public, if they do show up or want to show up, they know when it is.
Great.
I don't think we've really been doing a great job on that, right?
No, we have not.
There's room for improvement.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? We'll move on. Mary Beth?
You have the superintendent's report. I thought the one thing that would be helpful to highlight here, and Richard, perhaps you'd be willing to talk a little bit about just the big picture piece, but the details are in the report. We want to keep you updated, the board updated, the community updated in terms of how things are progressing with Prosper Valley School. So Richard, could you make a couple of high-level comments around that?
We are moving along. We have brought on 2 engineers, I think as outlined in here. One is along the civil engineering side, one is along the building health or building science side. There were recommendations from community members, actually several community members, to bring them on. So we have signed contracts with them. The challenge, of course, is their schedule. Each one of them is looking to start sometime after the first of the year before they'll be able to get in and do the work that they're going to be doing. Our HVAC engineer is really on hold right now, waiting to hear the results of any of the efforts that are undertaken so that he can properly size the HVAC system as it relates to the dehumidification. And then we did put in 48 or 50 relative humidity sensors into the slab These are digital sensors. You can go around and measure what the relative humidity is, and it's actually down within the slab. So it's not all the way at the bottom where it's the wettest, nor at the top where it's the driest. It's in the center, according to one of the engineering policies. And we are pulling that information on a daily basis, and that's actually available. I think there's a reference in here to the Google page, so if you'd like to take a look at them. What I can say is the preponderance of our measurements are running at 99% humidity right now. As Joe likes to say, is Joe here? I'll give him credit. 1% more and we're in the pond. So we have humidity, issues throughout the building. It's not just along the edges. It's within the building. It's within different rooms, and it's good information that we can provide to the engineers and look for them to be able to come back and say, here's what we see, here's the kind of mitigation that might be able to address it, and we're getting closer.
Richard, what should we be seeing given this time of year and this weather? Should our humidity be lower than that? I mean,
the humidity is not the humidity in the air. The humidity is the relative humidity in the slab.
yeah.
So
I
it's
mean,
whatever
but-
the pressure is of the water or whatever moisture is coming up from underneath seems to be causing the challenge here. Historically, going back to the 92, 93, when they last were measuring this, winter was some of the worst time for humidity within the slab. To me, that's counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but so it's consistent. But I think from our side, we're just trying to have that real data to be able to provide to the engineers to show them, and hoping that they're going to be able to help us interpret what that is, and more importantly, what to do about it.
Can I just follow up to that question? Is the humidity level within a slab in a building that doesn't have issues 0% or 50%? Or, do you know what I mean?
I do, and there are a number of white papers out there, of which I've read, maybe a dozen of them. It seems to target that 75% is a mature slab. That's what would be expected. My guess is you could read another white paper that will say it's lower, another one will say it's a little higher. That's one that's at least a number that I saw. But I think, anyone who really has an interest in here, the concept of relative humidity within slabs has been written about quite a bit. And for those that want to check it out.
It's still
Yeah.
curing.
Pardon me?
It's still curing.
Well, the slab always cures, but it's now a 25-year-old slab, so it should have reached a level of,
Curing.
yes.
Sorry if you had already touched on this. The last meeting, we were waiting to hear back when the engineers were actually going to come use it. It wasn't going to be until after the first of the year. Have we gotten a actually firm date?
We
on
have
it?
not gotten an actual firm date.
Yeah.
No, we have not from them. What we understand is that their schedules, when we contract them, which was a couple weeks ago now, that they would not be able to get on site until after the first of the year. So we're expecting them first week to second week of January, and then some periods of week of work as well as writing reports. So we're hoping to have a report either end of February or into March. But as of right now, that's what we're pushing for, is to try and be getting them within that kind of a time frame.
Anything else for that?
No, again, there's some information just in terms of updates and enrollment, some feedback in terms of the different departments around budget, safety plan that Sherry's going to talk to more at length. One other piece that's in here that's helpful for the board to be aware of, although my sense is that the state is struggling to get this out. There's something called an annual snapshot for districts that the state will be publishing as part of ESSA funding and that kind of thing. They had indicated to us that they would send it to the district in advance to have a quick look at it. The idea behind it is to be a far more robust report card than they're able to do this first time around. We have heard absolutely nothing from the state at this point. So I'm anticipating they're going to release it because it has to do with federal funding. We have not had any information from the state as of yet. But I wanted to let you know it's coming. At this point, it seems likely that they may not meet the target, just because of the fact that we have had zero communication around it. But that is something that we can anticipate from the state. And again, it's going out to different districts with report cards around things like culture and academic proficiency.
This is a new thing the state does?
Yes, it's a new report card that that's not.
Did you have to submit
Well, it's part of that
information?
educational quality review, remember when that
Yeah.
crew came in, with
Yeah.
the report, so that was kind of the first part of it.
I remember, do you have to submit information annually then?
They take the data, like that goes from SBAC and things like that. So the data upload comes, so there's nothing specific that we submit.
Okay.
And then Richard, just back on the budget that we approved, the 50K for the testing over at the school, the
Yes.
engineers and everything, we're still within.
We're still within.
You don't need
that
anything extra at this
$50,000.
point?
That's correct. I think each one of the engineers came in at about $7,500.
Okay,
So yes, we're still within that.
okay.
Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
That will be it.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any questions? All those in favor of approving the motion on the table, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it, the motion passes.
Can we
Thanks,
just be sure, Paige, please, that the item you have there has to be signed by many board members on
Yes.
the assumption, the acknowledgement
Do you have
assumption?
a formal copy, or do you want me to take this copy?
That one will be fine.
All right,
Thank you.
even though it has stuff on the front and back?
Still okay. Just want to be sure we get enough signatures and the clerk also. Is not here.
It just, remind us what we're signing?
What we're signing here is when we put the unified district together, it stated that we are assuming the liabilities of all of those
Yeah.
districts that are merging. One of the districts has a bond, the high school still has an outstanding bond, and this is a formal recognition to the bond bank that the board understands that we accepted that.
Okay. Here.
Oh, that's it. Okay. Safety school presentation.
All right, so to kind of remind you of what we went, the path that we followed. So last year, we received Title IV funding. A portion of that funding goes towards safety. We connected with Rob Evans, who is the Vermont School Safety Liaison, to make a recommendation of who we could contract with to do a safety assessment for the district. And so we went with Margolis Healy, who is out of Vermont, but they work nationally. The first step of the process was that we submitted to them any documents we had, policies, procedures around safety. So they did a full document review. They came for 3 days at the end of October, beginning of November. We toured every facility. They met with leadership team. They met with first responders. They met with school counselors. So in the 3 days they were here, they collected all the information. Within a month's time, we received a 20-page report. It's still in draft form. We have a few more corrections coming back. So this report presentation is basically their findings and recommendations, both as a district as well as individual buildings.
And this is a company, like Margolis Healy, is a company that just does safety assessments at schools?
Correct.
Okay. All they
Universities,
do.
public elementaries, public schools, private schools, so California, so across the country. The two individuals that came were ex-New Jersey cops. They were great. They gave us, it was like individual tutorials. They met with each principal, toured each building with the principals, and got a lot of specific information about this room and all the other parts around this building. So it really was a great walkthrough. They did a visioning session with the whole leadership team together around safety, the issues that we saw. And just kind of talking to the leadership team, it really isn't, concern about an individual rogue student. There are other events that we address on a regular basis, more around families, family systems, custodial parents. Those are the kinds of issues that really concern principals, buildings around safety more so than the rogue incidents. So those are the kinds of situations that we deal on a more regular basis and that we need to be prepared for. So, so what I'm going to go through is their general observations and major themes. This was just a quote from the report that I really think summarized their findings. The WCSU is now tasked with the responsibility of viewing safety and security holistically as opposed to a siloed fashion where each school was independent of the others. So how do we look at it systemically? How do we form those communications? How do we ensure that safety in one building is the same as safety in another building? So the first thing was around the basic district-wide security standards, access control. So that was how do people enter the building. Each school manages visitors differently. Some schools lock the front door, some don't. Even if they're locking the front door, how do people come in through the door? Where's the communication system? So the current practices are varied and based on localized preferences throughout the facilities. And I know individual boards had conversations around safety a number of years ago and have very different opinions on how to address how individuals enter the building. What they're looking for or recommending is that we have more consistent practices across the district. It does that sometimes. So we really need to develop a district-wide access control policy specifying that all doors to schools are locked and that after drop-off, all ingress is funneled through a main entrance. It can be really confusing. For example, the middle school and high school, what way do you go in? Where are you supposed to be going through? What doors are open? What are unlocked? So really making sure we're really clear about that. When someone comes to the door and buzzes, that there's a way to communicate with the person who's buzzing. Why are you here? Who are you? What's your purpose for being here? So that was one of the recommendations. Visitor management policies, so writing your name down, getting your visitor pass, really being clear about what the person is doing there. Utilizing that video, I know at the middle school and high school, now you buzz, you're supposed to, there's an opportunity to talk, often that's not used, and so using that more consistently. Once inside, all visitors are greeted by a staff member, sign and obtain a visitor pass. So again, those consistent practices that become more routine to ensure we know who's in the building, why they're in the building. And then when they leave the building, making sure they sign out and return that pass when they leave. It's a simple routine, but not a lot of schools have this practice in place. Signage and clear at each building, clearly directing visitors. So we want to control how people enter the building. We want them to know how to enter the building. We want to make sure they're going through those primary entrances. They noted in each building it was a little confusing, even Woodstock Elementary. While we have the Woodstock Elementary sign in the front, where do we go? Where do visitors come? Really making sure that signage is in place. Requiring that faculty and staff display employee ID. And so that's not just for we, for a period of time, had them at the middle school and high school. It seemed impersonal, but really it's so kids know all the people the adults in the building who are supposed to be there. First responders come in, they knew who the adults are, and they know what their role is. So having those those teacher IDs or staff IDs is really an important part of school safety. The other part is the door position alarms. We have so many modes of egress, so for ways that people can leave the building. And, we talk to the elementary school principals, and we have students that, move often outside of the classroom. We don't know if they're leaving the building. So if someone goes out that door, if you're not in this gym, you wouldn't know they're going out that door. So it's a buzzer system in the old library at the middle school, in the middle school and high school. If you use a separate door, a buzzer goes off. So that buzzer is to inform someone's gone out that door, we know where they're going. Killington is challenging because two sides of the building are the forest. So if you go out that door, you are going towards the forest. So if a child leaves the building, we need to know they've gone out that door, and we need to be aware where they're leaving. That will also help with safety. So looking at those kinds of buzzers on our doors. And this was a piece, again, most of the recommendations were pretty low-level recommendations. A visitor management system is where you speak into the system, they pin out your name tag, and it becomes a really kind of a system of recording how people are coming and leaving the building. We don't have to take all the recommendations. This is one of the more high-end recommendations, but it was one of the things they included in the report, so I thought I should include it here. So installing cameras monitoring the ingress points of all buildings as well as all doors that lead directly to class space. So for example, when you come into the lobby at the middle school and high school, there's a big open space. You walk in through the door, and then you walk across that open area and you sign in. So where people go after that, knowing where people are once they're in the building. Not all buildings that are that large need that, but what they really recommended is having some cameras within the building as well as outside the building. Again, on the outside of the perimeter of Killington, there are no cameras on those outside. So if a student's missing, we want to know where they've gone or what's happened. We have no way of knowing that because we don't have cameras to really see that piece. Policy development. There are no formal policies driving safety and security at the WCSU. When we asked for our documents, it didn't take long to collect them because we really didn't have a lot of those in place. They recommended a number of policy areas, behavioral threat assessments. So bringing, and I'll go into more detail, but a behavioral threat assessment, looking at who, if we're concerned about an individual student or parent or other, how do we address that? Emergency communication, so if a system goes down, how do we communicate between buildings, between the central office? And regulation of systems that keep student and staff records, and I'll share more detail on each of those. So a behavioral threat assessment team would include, so that's an interdisciplinary threat assessment team, and usually that would be a school counselor, a building administrator, so if there was some individual that that people had a concern about, who do you bring that information to? What are the tools are used to see if that individual is a threat to the school community? And what's the process that we use to assure that their needs are being met, that we are evaluating whether they're safe in our building, that process. So it's putting together a policy to all faculty and staff to make it clear who should be notified about a community member of concern, having training of that team to make sure they're, what are the current practices, what are the current tools for that threat assessment. After each meeting, after each training exercise, in each actual case. So when an event occurs, that we really process after, what do we do, how do we handle that, how do we come back and look at it and learn from those events that happen. We had a shelter in place at the beginning of the school year. We quickly processed it, but we really didn't have time to come back and say, okay, here are the things that we did well, here's some thoughts for next time. So really having that group in place. And not just for the middle school and high school, for any of the elementary schools. And making sure that we have that opportunity for that team to be available to any school that needs it or building administrator who needs it. And having a process that you can anonymously report. I mean, it was wonderful and really helpful in the situation where a student brought to attention some social media that they were exposed to. So then having that process, but we really don't have something anonymous reporting for students or even staff to give that information about a person of concern. There is software available that looks at social media. So there is specific software that monitors social media for any kinds of specific statements, information around school and school safety that can be used to really collect that information. So if something happens at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's communication, conversations, we're able to address it before school starts. We don't have to wait till everyone comes in the building. So really having that opportunity to collect that information and be aware of it sooner rather than later. And the Vermont School Safety Center has some recommendations around that kind of technology. So we need a specific policy around emergency communication modalities and roles. So what's the role of the superintendent if there's an event in an individual building? What's the role of the principal? What's the role of the teachers? What are the roles of the central office staff? And how do we communicate to each other? We don't have the redundancies. The redundancies means if one system goes down, what's our backup system? So some communities do have more than one internet server, so there's a backup of our internet communication. Our phone lines go through our internet. The internet goes down. How do they then communicate? Some of our schools, even if the phone systems go down, we don't have cell phone service, so how do we communicate? How do you communicate to first responders? Those kinds of pieces we really need to look at and see what we're going to do to address those issues. We don't have a policy for that, a process. Acceptable use of policies for security cameras, electronic access control systems, and any software as a service. So what they brought to our attention, so we have cameras in different buildings, we have a number of cameras at the middle school and high school. If law enforcement comes in and says, we want to see your cameras on such and such a date at such and such a time, we do not have a policy on how we address that request. So even though we're collecting a lot of data, we are mining that, we're keeping it for a period of time. What do we do with it and who can have access to it? So we really need, their recommendation was to have a policy around that kind of technology. During an emergency, students and staff will need to take immediate action to protect themselves. WCUD needs to actively promote awareness of emergency procedures. And so right now we have this system, it's called SRP. So it's around how we respond, and so it's a standardized practice. It's the same as first responders, shelter in place, lockout, evacuate, and lockdown locks. So this is in every single classroom across the district. This is from our central office, so that first responders' language is the same language that we use in the school. There are other procedures in terms of how to address someone in a building that is a threat. I know that Killington Elementary trained in the ALICE approach, which is around protecting yourself and being more assertive during an emergency situation. The state of Vermont is not going with ALICE. There's another process that they're recommending, but really making sure they have the opportunities to train in ways other than sheltering in place, that we know that we have to do more in that situation, and we need to train for that. So that's the SRP protocol. Annual training for all faculty and staff. We go over at the beginning of the year. We do shelter in places. We do, some schools do actual evacuation, leaving the building, walking through the process. Not all schools do that. One of the things I talked with when we were talking with first responders, they would love to come into our buildings. What we talked about during an either February break or April break, having first responders, state police come in. They would love to have that opportunity. We need someone to coordinate and invite in. We do lockdowns in each of our buildings, and some of our buildings are doing evacuation drills consistently. So actually leaving the building and going to our safe place. And then incident review after each drill to identify gaps and challenges. We try, we think about it, we do spreadsheets, but it really, as the event passes, we're addressing the needs of each situation. How do we actually process what we did and how we acted is not something that is a regular practice. And so conducting exercises and drills, one of the things that we talked about that was really interesting was with first responders is, you know, we have the Woodstock police, we have the Killington police, what happens in Barnard, what happens in Reading, Chief Bush was great. If something happened in Prosper Valley, he would definitely cross lines, he would go to Prosper Valley. What we talked about is having memorandums of understanding with our local sheriffs. You know, in Barnard we have sheriff, I know in the North Road, I've met him personally. Only one. Never spent. There's also a sheriff in Reading that we could have a number under. We have 6 minutes. We have 6 minutes in an event to really make a difference. And so how do we use those 6 minutes most effectively? And so having memorandums of understanding with this close to law enforcement we have. You know, all our towns are covered by state police, but there are only 2 to 3 state police on for that whole region every day. And so that is incredibly challenging. Management and coordination of security systems. So there's a lack of institutional knowledge regarding safety, security, and emergency management at WCSU. I never knew that there was in Prosper Valley a button that would lock the inside doors. So it's the panic button. It was right by the administrative assistant's door, and it would close and secure that intersection. Only people at Prosper Valley knew that. So each building has its own little idiosyncratic practices around safety. There wasn't an institutional knowledge. So Joe and I toured all the buildings and have a better knowledge, but again, it's not collected anywhere. So one of the recommendations that they were having is to create a position of security and safety manager to coordinate the safety and security program for all of the operations facilities. So the kinds of things that, you know, we're talking about recommendations. I'm the Director of Instructional Support Services, coordinating a safety audit. So it's really, you know, whose role is to make sure all this training happens? Whose role is it to make sure that we have those memorandums of understanding? Whose role is it to make sure first responders have experiences in all our buildings? Whose role is it to do the training? And so what they made were 3 possible options: was having a school resource officer. An SRO is hired, paid for by the local police. Mary Beth and I are going to meet with Chief Bush to talk about that. That was not one of their first recommendations. Another opportunity is a retired officer would need to be an employee of a police department, again, as opposed to WCSU. That's kind of an in-between position. But again, they would have, an SRO is very specific in its role. It wouldn't be doing some of the training kinds of pieces or policy pieces that we're talking about. That could happen more with a retired officer. The one that they did recommend for the size and scope of our district, because of the number of towns involved, is a non-sworn security specialist with a background in safety, security, and emergency management, who would do all those pieces. They wouldn't have a gun. They would be really based in one building, but be able to be available to any of the buildings around the concerns that were talked about. So that was their recommendation.
What building would they be in?
Probably the middle school and high school is the most central, and the largest number of students.
He would have an
So-
office there?
Excuse me?
His office would be there?
That person's,
Not
yeah.
at the SU is what I'm getting at.
That would be that is the, when we looked at a job description, they sent us one. Chittenden has a non-sworn security management person, and it would be based in a building, again, still developing those relationships, addressing some of the concerns within the building, but it wouldn't be, no, out of the central office, it would be a building-based position.
Okay.
And they're able to then move out and do training.
How many districts have this position?
There's SROs and there are this position. When I talked to Fran, he was saying there are like 3 or 4 in the state. More districts have SROs at their high school. Usually that's when all their schools are within one town, so you're not looking at multiple police forces in multiple communities. And there are, there's grants around SROs. It's usually paid by the police force. There's also a COPS grant that pays for 3/4 for a number of years. They then make recommendations by each school building. In Barnard Academy, there was a hide a key that was for community members to come in and use the facility. That needs to go away. Number of exterior doors for first responders are really good. I will say though, I was very impressed by Barnard because we were standing there inside, myself and the 2 gentlemen, and a parent came to the door, and so we're going to say, well, and Reggie, who's the administrator, was not in her office, the principal was not there. So we stood and waited, and the poor parent is out there, and I'm like, I'm losing all my points right here. But what was interesting, a student came along, saw that there was a parent out there, went and got Reggie, and came, and then Reggie let the parent in. So that I was really excited to see that the Barnard kids were really well trained. They don't open doors. Whereas other buildings, kids are like, they're so, welcoming, and they'll go to the door and let anyone in. You need to mark the doors on the outside, so first responders say, there are vents in room 2. We all know where room 2, it follows the same path for every building. So that was Barnard. Killington, lock all exterior doors and limit all ingress to main entrance immediately, so that right now the front door is not locked. Number interior doors to aid first responders, post no parking signs around the perimeter of the castle playground. That signage piece was a really key piece in terms of safety. And cameras on the outside perimeter of the building and the main office. This is due to schools in proximity to the wooded areas. And shades and blinds in all the classroom windows that are being drawn from the inside. So if there's an emergency and we're in shelter in place, there's no way to see into the classroom. Middle school and high school, again, increasing the signage at the front of the building, clarifying the main entrance. Large sign of the visitor reception, so when you walk in, you know exactly where visitors are supposed to go. Number of exterior doors for emergency responders. Make sure the boiler room door is locked. Monitoring the main lobby where visitors report. And then secure the door to remain office. So as you come in, the lobby area where you sign in, there's an interior space, which is where Heather is, and that their recommendation was to lock that door. They really would stop people right there, having chairs there to kind of be a welcoming area, but not having the ability to enter that space. The 400s is down in that by the auditorium, putting more lighting in there, and having an opportunity just to close off sections during night, so when yoga practice is happening or a basketball game, that we can really contain the space that visitors can come and go in. Prosper Valley, so a capture area, as I came to learn, is really having that control of, so people can enter, and they come to a second set of doors that they need to buzz in. So that's where you can have that conversation. Who are you? What's your purpose? Exchange visitor passes. So give us some really good ideas for Prosper Valley that really didn't mean that we had to build a wall, but there's some different ways that could be accomplished. Part we're making class and office doors lockables from the inside. Not all the doors have the locks on the inside. Blinds and shades all the classrooms. So as you can see, most of these recommendations aren't high-end, huge cost pieces. They're pretty reasonable pieces. And then Reading. Blinds and shades in the classrooms. They were concerned about some of the ground level windows and that you really need to do some competitive entrance to those windows. at Woodstock Elementary. What they're recommending right now, as you enter Woodstock Elementary, the buzzer's on the outside, and then you go into a vestibule to really move that buzzer into the next area so you have better line sight as who's coming in and have that interchange. Interior classroom doors for first responders, we need to make those numbered on the outside, block the boiler room, signage in the front of the building clearly marking the front entrance, and shatterproof safety film with the sliding glass doors that lead to the class space. So the front classrooms on the first floor, those sliding windows. Right now they have furniture in front of them, they have got a really shatterproof safety film would be a better choice there. And WCSU office, we're not the only ones that we need to control egress into that space as well by locking the buzzing and installing a camera. Because when people are upset, it's usually a hair about the line. So, but again, controlling who comes in and how they come in, make sure it's readable by office staff. I think that was video phone at the front door. Panic devices in the reception area, because RADA is so important to us. So superintendent's office, any voice where HR counseling takes place, so when you're having those interpersonal conversations. So the conclusion is bringing previously independent facilities together presents difficulties on many fronts, including safety and security. Based on our stakeholder interviews and on-site observations, WCSU will need to devote resources and time to remediate the challenge it faces in developing a unified safety and security program. So we'll finalize that document, and we just got a few changes that needed to be made, and then it'll be available. Questions?
So all these rules that go into effect, what time of day? It might sound like a silly question, but is it 24/7, 365? Or is it just like 8 o'clock in the morning till 20 to 3 when school is let out?
I think that gets to the policy question that's out there, because we don't...
I'm asking what did the recommendation?
They didn't make a time recommendation.
Okay.
So those would be the kinds of policies that we would want to have in place that really need to get built out that we don't have now.
And they have templates of all the policies that we can access. They really have an amazing list of resources, so we can build from those recommendations and then decide what works for us.
And so the money, I was thinking of the money for all this, we put like actually doing the cameras and room numbers and different
Yes.
locks, that was put in that's in the proposed
So
budget,
we
right?
have under that additional funds for capital improvements.
Okay.
We put 50,000 in. So we just got this report, so we haven't had a
Yeah.
chance to price everything out. But
You
we
think
that-
that's realistic?
We think it's probably pretty
I mean,
close.
does it $50,000 to put cameras on all the buildings?
Look at Richard. Look at Richard.
I think the 50 is a good start to begin to get into it, and as it gets clarified, we can go on. It's likely a higher investment depending on what level of implementation the board or, is determined here. But 50 is a good start to at least take care of most of those.
I know Garen said he's already started. So some of those practice signage, some of those cameras were already resources within the current budget, so they're already starting to put those pieces in place.
Okay. And then, so the two parts of it, the hardware and then the person, that's
Yeah,
the
so
consultant.
you get a sense of the scope of the work that we're talking about, and having somebody that has a background in this area and can be focused on this. Things like, policies, getting those agreements in with local responders, ensuring that we've got all the training set up, all that type of thing. I think a lot of that can get taken care of in the first year. And so we're thinking that we don't need to bring in a full-time employee for the district.
Why wouldn't we have a consultant for the 1 year and have that SRO if there are funds that, grant funding out?
And that would be a board decision.
Yeah.
That's...
Why wouldn't you have an SRO if there's grant money out there?
Well, in the past, that was not a popular we looked at that, I would say 10 years ago, and it was really not supported at that point in time.
People didn't want a police officer in school.
Right.
A lot of people don't want police officers.
So I think that's a discussion that needs to be on this level, and then Chief Blish is meeting with us about the
Did we ever have
opportunities.
one at Woodstock?
No. I've been there 24 years, we've never had an SRO.
Do most high schools in Vermont have an SRO?
It depends on the size of the
Size.
school.
Rutland has one.
Yeah. my sister's school in St.
Burlington.
Albans.
So, yeah, it's really around the size.
The size of the school.
We did have some concerning numbers when we look at our youth risk behavior survey. That has been an issue. But SRO, who the person is, what their experience is, you really have to have the right person for that position to make it effective. So it's a really important decision. I think we really need to think deeply and, meet with Chief Blish and see his thinking and what the opportunities are there.
Okay.
Does an SRO always carry a gun or not necessarily?
If they're a licensed police officer, they will. Because they are part of the law, they are part of the police force, they are,
So, for example, one of the things that can happen with an SRO, because it's funded by police grants as well, if the police needed backup or something like that, they can pull the SRO out of the school to go to an event outside of the school.
Okay. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you. Okay, strategic planning update.
So one of the things that I wanted to do is just keep this on your radar screen, because you're going to be getting information as we get into the new year. And I want to be sure that people are remembering where this information is coming from. What's the process that we're undertaking around this strategic planning initiative. What you have here is a timeline. You can see that we are now in December. We're about halfway through the process. Just a quick snapshot where we are there. And just walking you through the different phases of the process. So again, you have a sense of the scope of the work and the intensity of the work. So over the summer, there was a presentation to our school leadership team around what this work would entail. And there was also a presentation to this board at the summer retreat, talking about this is what the strategic planning process looks like. The board voted to go ahead with Patel for Kids as the group that was working with us on our strategic planning. Then phase 2 is the Envision piece. So what's the target? What's the outcome for our students? So last winter and spring, we had a group of about 23 folks come together over a period of 3 full days to work on looking at many different aspects and looking at what our students need when they graduate, what's important to this area. And we came up with a consensus draft around what the characteristics are for the portrait of our graduates. And then in the fall, the board had a workshop on the landscape shifts. We then took that landscape shift workshop along with a review of the portrait of graduate out to 5 of our different communities and offered that. We also did the landscape shift in the portrait of graduate document presentation to our faculty and to our students. We put out a survey to try to collect more data. We provided the board with the survey data, the landscape shift feedback, and at our November meeting, the board voted to on the portrait of a graduate, making the adjustment from academic proficiency to academic excellence. Otherwise, it maintained as it was. So that's our target, right? This is where that was the vision piece, where are we headed, where do we want, what do we want our kids to look like when they finish our system, or go through our system. Then we went into phase 3, which was the inquire, where are we now? Where's our starting point? So we uploaded tons of documents from our district, from entry plans to assessment data to the education quality review that took place, to newsletters from schools, all different types of things, as information for an evidence-based SWOT, which what are the district's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then we had our first meeting of the strategic planning design team, and we went through the same exercise of what are the perceived strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We collected all of that data together. And then, to kind of capture where we are in terms of a starting point. Then where we are right now is in the middle of phases 4 and 5, which is the design phase and the develop phase. So the strategic planning writing group reviewed the recommendation of bucket areas, right? So we took the portrait of a graduate, we took the evidence and perception-based SWOTs. We said, okay, what makes sense here in terms of buckets to start to look at? These bucket areas were reviewed with the leadership team, and then the bucket areas were reviewed with the strategic planning design team just last week. So our writing group is now starting to translate some of the bucket areas into goal statements and strategies, taking all the feedback that the strategic planning design team provided to us. And right now, just so the board is aware, we are looking at 5 big bucket areas that the goals, or categories that goals would form in. One is around this area of student success. One is around our learning environments and facilities. One is around community alliance, in terms both how these remarkable resources that we have, we can use those to improve our students' education, but also thinking about it as a two-way relationship. But also, how can our students be contributors in our communities and benefit the communities? And how does a strong, highly regarded school system impact the viability of towns and communities? So looking at the community alliance is a two-way relationship. A 4th bucket area is around culture, particularly as we work to come together, and merge together in systems, making sure that we bring all communities along and everyone feels connected. Another piece that came out there was around this idea of student voice and making sure that our students are a vibrant part of our culture and their voices are heard. And then finally is the area of foundational systems. I may sound like a broken record sometimes about foundational systems, but those are the things that need to be in place, because when they're not, you spend 5 hours doing something that should take 3 minutes. So these are the big bucket areas that we are moving forward with. It will be going back to our strategic planning design team as we start to get tighter around goals and strategies to achieve them. Looking forward, we have the strategic planning design team will be vetting our goals and strategies. That will happen in January. We will have a community event to, again, put out goals and strategies and ask our community to give feedback on how we're doing with us. Then we'll survey the community around our goals and strategies. The board will have a chance to review the first draft of the strategic plan in February, and with an anticipated vote on the strategic plan in March. So again, you've got 100 things coming at you all at once. It's like drinking from the fire hose, being on this board. And I want, this presentation is brief, but just to keep you remembering where we're going with this, the different places that we're getting input, the different ways that we're trying to engage the community in this process. So I'd stop there. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, we have a second reading of the transportation policy. Jim, you want to chat about it?
So, over to
Go ahead, Pamela.
Pamela, do you want to chat about it?
Well, Pamela was involved in the first one too, so she can tell you the differences.
So from the last draft, we made 2 changes after the conversation last month. We took out the phrase "on public roads" in the second paragraph. Since the buses actually go on some non-public roads. And on the second page, bus routes, bus stops, we added some language to the late bus section. And I hope everyone has read it, but basically we just talked about balancing equity with cost containment. And even though it's a little unusual to add this level of detail of procedure. Since it's a kind of tricky situation, we just thought we'd try out putting it right into the policy. And the specifics are that we took out the word typically. Before it said typically demonstrated need consists of 10 students, minimum of 3 days a week. We thought that was an ambiguous word for a policy. So, and then we thought we would really need to define a trial period for families, for the bus contract, for a variety of reasons. So we put in 6 weeks and thought that we could open that to discussion.
So we took out the public roads because there are, at least in Killington, we do go on to the private property. But we left in there, it's up to the discretion of the superintendent, okay? So it's just not, it's up to you to come to us and as a board, you can enter onto any road that you come to us and approve it. And once again, just like Pamela had said, with the late bus, I guess there was some confusion of who was supposed to start it and when it was supposed to start, and then how long it should be for. So I believe that this here says there will be a sign-up sheet or whatever for the first whatever, and then if that's met, then we will run a bus for 6 weeks to make sure that it does happen to that 10 people per day for at least 3 of the 5 days. And we came up with the 6 weeks because of the checkpoints or whatever. And usually in the first batch of school, there's a lot of sports that are going on the first 6 weeks of school.
Yeah, and we know that, the ridership changes with the seasons and sports, but it's just too unwieldy to change the policy for every term, so it has to be an annual thing. And we had also talked about, last month at the meeting, our meeting, we talked about, sorry, I'm very tired right now, the issue that there's not consistency with bus drivers or bus routes with equipment on the bus. And we can't really have a policy that's based on this sort of whims of different drivers,
Did we get any response from
And so far, we haven't been able to figure that out.
Well, we asked that in our last meeting,
we asked the bus
finance,
company
to Richard to go.
Hey, what did they say about bringing hockey and ski equipment on the bus? Because we've been told that it just kind of depends on the driver. Some drivers let them, some don't.
Apparently there's no federal Department of Transportation requires anything except something can be turned into a projectile if it actually. Well, I mean, this is sort of standard stuff.
Kids can
all wheel cocks, fire extinguishers, etc. are always mounted. They would not recommend skis on a home-to-school bus. Skates would be stored in a bag. The bag would have to be kept closed. During ski charters or ski team events, the skis can be loaded in the back door and placed under the seats so that they are secure. We cannot do this while doing a home-to-school route, however. I would not promote this equipment on the buses except in the case of ski or skate event. This is the same for all of our customers, not just WCSU.
And we felt that we needed the answer back from the bus company, so then we can get that word out to the parents.
I would just note that you said home to school or school to home bus service. I did question somebody just because I was speaking to somebody in the Essex school district, and they said in the case that it was going to a school, they've changed now some, but when it was going from the school to like a school, like if you had it stopping at the Barnard Academy and the Prosper Valley School and stuff, they did make those exceptions because it only took a few minutes and it was one stop they're making. It's not like they're stopping for 20 kids along the route.
Well, and think about it, if you were taking a team from a school to a school, then that's okay.
Right, but it's a problem if for a student who's doing the sport after school, they're bringing that equipment on the bus in the morning too, which is home to school.
And that was where the question
It's
was,
too crowded, probably.
because the late bus, let's say for Killington, only has really one stop. But it was in the morning going to, and there's multiple bus stops.
So are we waiting?
So we decided that what the policy committee is going to do a review of all procedures as they really take policies. So we thought we would leave this piece of equipment on the bus, leave it as it has been, which is basically like you can't bring hockey or skis.
Okay.
And then when we do the procedural review, we'll see
So
if we
are
can
like
figure it out.
lacrosse sticks the same as like hockey sticks? I mean, they're like.
No, one has a net, one has a blade.
I guess-
I know, but it's still like.
You could hit someone.
I mean, this is where we left it, I don't know.
I think that hockey has to do with, except for, I guess, with the field.
Well,
I think
Richard
it's
just-
both with the equipment and the bags, well, with the buses.
It's the big bags, and there's, like, for the Killington bus, there's no room, and that bus is packed.
See, but those-
If you bring
those
in
are-
those hockey bags, you can't walk up and down the aisles.
Those are two different
can't walk
things. If there's not enough room, there's not enough room. What they're talking about here is just from a safety point of
Well,
view.
what we put in front of you is a policy, and we had said that the baggage would fall underneath procedure, and we're waiting for answers on that. Okay, so we're voting tonight on the second reading, I believe, and,
Well, do you
I have
want,
something else I want to bring up, not equipment. I got an email from a parent today, of a Woodstock Elementary parent, who was a preschooler. And I know I've asked this last time about preschoolers on the bus. Our transportation policy just covers K through 12. You know, she was talking about how this mother was, how she has to pick up her preschooler, her 4, almost 5, the kid's gonna turn 5 in January, and how very difficult it is for her to park. She's gotta go into the school to pick up the little kid, then she's gotta take the kid, go back to work, how it's so hard to find a parking spot, and how it, you know, is really disruptive to her day, and how next year she's not gonna be able to have her child, she's not gonna enroll the next one in preschool at Woodstock because she can't, the parking situation is too difficult, and how she really wished maybe we don't put 3-year-olds on, but might we consider 4-year-olds on there, or, you know, I don't know. She was just sort of putting it out there, and I feel like we just need to discuss it one more time. I mean, I know I brought it up last time, and
Yeah, I mean, I would offer, and it is,
is it illegal?
It's not
illegal, but
illegal.
it's not a policy that you see very often in terms of allowing preschoolers on the bus. And I appreciate from the challenges she's having as a parent, and I'm wondering if we look at that more from a parking and how we make it easier to have parents go in and go out. But when you're talking about preschoolers, they are very young. They can do surprising things.
I just think we need to have this discussion.
And you know, and when you developmentally at those ages, in 3 and 4, you know, you don't want to get into a scenario where your unique situation and we think your unique child has enough maturity to do that
To go on
versus another student that, oh, well, what's your criteria for being? It's a very difficult piece.
Don't they still have to be in car seats?
No, so.
Not on
so-
a bus.
Not on a
Not
bus.
on a bus.
So we did just go through this environment
It was a
last
very
year,
big discussion.
and legally, like Mary Beth said, there was no legal issue with it. But I think what was covered, and I'm sorry, because I'm not sure if it's still on here, is we were using the WCSU clause that it does mention behavior and stuff, and we made sure to emphasize, because there's a big public outcry for wanting pre-Ks on the bus, so we just made sure to emphasize that we would start that way, but if there's any behavioral issues with that child, like it's a 3-year-old and they are not mature enough to be able to sit in their seat, then that's grounds for them not to be able to ride that bus. And it does. So if it says that in the policy, I think you just have to make sure that maybe a separate notice. I think we sent to the pre-K parents just so they're really aware that you can give it a try, but if there's somebody that's going to be up in the aisles and stuff, the bus driver does not have the capacity to manage that, so it's a one-time thing. And if they can't seem to manage it, then unfortunately they probably won't be able to ride the bus.
you know, I know we have in here K through 12, but the second paragraph on this policy, it actually is the superintendent will establish routes and designate stops after considering both the safety of children and efficiency of operation. And I think that could possibly fall under whatever. That the superintendent will consider the following: the age and health of pupils, the distance to be traveled, condition of the road, and the highway. So I mean, that there is saying the age and health of pupils.
And it does.
I think that would take that into consideration. I just, you know, like living in Killington and getting a lot of calls from parents, you know, complaining about the bus, or we have very few stops in Killington. I think we have 3 stops in Killington, and that's it. And it doesn't work to some parents' work schedule or whatever. And my response always is, it's not the school's responsibility to get your kid to school. It's your responsibility. We're supplying 3 stops in town. Because it only will take an hour to get to school. If we stop everywhere, your kids will be getting on the bus at 5:30 in the morning, and then we'll have those parents complaining to us.
So,
Sorry, and this mom's situation will change because I guess next year her kid will be in kindergarten.
But she has another one.
She has
Who
another
could go to
coming in.
preschool.
But I thought Jackie and the kids were coming in after Belle for this particular reason, so that parents would be able to come up to the code.
And it's
and
pick
not
up,
have to
it's
deal.
pick up at the end of the day.
Wait, no, don't think about that.
are we adopting this, do you want us to adopt this tonight?
Yeah, I mean, but Patty has a hand up.
Yeah, sorry.
Is it a policy that there's somebody at school buildings for the elementary kids?
I'm sorry, Patty.
Is there a policy that there is somebody at every school building until the last child is dropped off? Because with G saying that the child will return to the home school, if there's not someone at the bus stop, do we know that there's somebody at the school? Okay, what happens, so what, do we care what happens to them after here? Does that be part of the policy? Or is it, there's an assumption that that's taken care of from there?
I think there's an assumption. I know that if the child is not greeted by a parent or a guardian, they have to call the school to say that they're returning the child to the
So
school.
that is a policy, that there's always somebody at the building to receive that phone call?
It's
I
worth
know it is
revisiting it, but it
Woodstock,
always
but
has
yeah.
been. There's someone at the school that waits for the bus driver to say everyone has been
Great, okay,
delivered.
thank you.
So we're really not adopting it today, we're actually making a motion
To adopt it
to-
for
to-
our
to
next
put
meeting.
adoption
That's what I
for
thought.
next meeting.
So do we have that motion on the table, Jim?
Yes.
Do we have a second? Second. All those in favor of the motion on the table?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay.
We had a second policy that we meant to warn, but sort of just got our signals mixed.
Yep.
So we'll be doing that next time, but just to put
Yeah,
that-
so Raina, what was that one that we just got
I
thrown
have
at?
It's student freedom of expression in school-sponsored media, and we just got word that it was required. I don't
Do we
know-
have that policy right now?
We have the policy, and the policy is pretty much written by the state, Raina, and all we had to do was put in WCUD.
But did we have it before at the high school or middle school?
No, it's
No,
new.
it just,
It's
it just,
a new
So
it just
we'll,
became
it will
out.
be in the next board book, and
Okay.
we'll warn it for that.
Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
Moved.
Second? Second. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
And this is just for board members.
This is Mary Beth's executive
Oh,
session, and then
okay.
we'll come out and go into a
Okay,
second.
so what is this?